The words were so quiet I almost didn't hear them. Miss Angela leaned in close during pickup, her hand gently on my arm, and whispered 6 words that made my blood run cold. "Your son isn't safe here anymore." I stared at her, frozen in the busy daycare hallway, while other parents rushed past us, collecting their children, chatting about dinner plans, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just tilted on its axis. Miss Angela was my 3-year-old son Ethan's teacher, the woman who had cared for him every weekday for the past year. The woman I trusted completely. And she had just told me he wasn't safe. What? I managed to whisper back, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She glanced around quickly, making sure no one was listening. "Not here. Can you come back after closing? 6:30? Please. It's important." I wanted to grab Ethan and run right then. I wanted to demand answers immediately. But something in Miss Angela's eyes, fear mixed with determination, told me she was risking something by even saying this much. So I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. If you've ever had someone you trust tell you something that turned your world upside down, you know that feeling of the ground disappearing beneath your feet. Please share your story in the comments. And if you're new here, please subscribe to support this channel. Your presence means everything. I went through the motions of collecting Ethan. He ran to me with his usual bright smile, showing me a painting he'd made, chattering about playing blocks with his friend Mason. I smiled and responded, but I was on autopilot. My mind was screaming. What did she mean he wasn't safe? Safe from what? From who? The drive home was a blur. My husband James was traveling for work, wouldn't be home until tomorrow. I was alone with this information, this fear, and I had to wait 3 more hours to understand what was happening. I fed Ethan dinner. I gave him a bath. I read him stories. And the entire time, my mind raced through possibilities. Was there a dangerous person at the daycare? Another child who was hurting him? A staff member? Had something happened that I didn't know about? Why hadn't Miss Angela just told me right away? At 6:15, I loaded a confused Ethan back into the car. "We have to go back to school, buddy." "Mommy forgot something." "My painting?" he asked hopefully. "Maybe," I lied, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. When we pulled into the daycare parking lot, it was empty except for 2 cars. One I recognized as Miss Angela's. The other belonged to the director, Mrs. Kim. That made me even more nervous. Whatever this was, it was serious enough that the director was involved. Miss Angela was waiting by the door. She let us in quickly, locking it behind us. "Thank you for coming back," she said quietly. "Mrs. Kim is waiting in her office." I held Ethan's hand as we walked down the familiar hallway that suddenly felt sinister and strange. What was I about to learn? What had been happening to my son in this place I thought was safe? Mrs. Kim's office door was open. She stood when she saw us, her face grave. "Mrs. Peterson, thank you for coming. Please sit down." "Miss Angela, why don't you take Ethan to the toddler room to play? There are some new toys he hasn't seen yet." Ethan looked at me uncertainly. I wanted to keep him with me, to never let him out of my sight again. But I forced a smile. "Go ahead, buddy." "I'll be right here." He went with Miss Angela, and I heard them walk down the hall. Then Mrs. Kim closed the door, and my hands started shaking. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm going to get straight to the point because I know Miss Angela's words to you were alarming. Your son is not in immediate physical danger. I want to say that first because I can see you're terrified." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, but my heart was still racing. "Then what? What's happening?" Mrs. Kim sat down across from me. 3 days ago, we hired a new assistant teacher, Mr. Bradley, for the preschool room. He came with excellent references, passed all background checks, and had years of experience. Everything checked out perfectly. "Okay," I said slowly, not understanding where this was going. "Yesterday, Miss Angela came to me with a concern. She said she recognized him from somewhere but couldn't place where. It was bothering her all day. Last night, she figured it out." Mrs. Kim opened a folder on her desk and pulled out a printout of a news article. She slid it across to me. The headline made my stomach drop. Former teacher acquitted in child neglect case due to technicality. I read the article with growing horror. 5 years ago, in a different state, a preschool teacher named Bradley Morrison had been accused of severe neglect. Multiple children in his care had been injured, left unsupervised, and emotionally traumatized. But the case was dismissed on a technicality related to how evidence was collected. He was never convicted. "This is him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is the man you just hired?" "Yes, but here's the problem. Legally, because he was never convicted, it doesn't show up on background checks. He changed states, and there's no formal record of wrongdoing. On paper, he's clean. But he's not clean," I said, anger rising through my fear. "He hurt children. Multiple children." "I know," Mrs. Kim said, her face pained. "I know." And the moment Miss Angela showed me this article, I began investigating. I've been calling the daycare where this happened, talking to former staff, gathering information. And Mrs. Peterson, everything I've learned confirms that this man should not be around children. Ever. "So fire him," I said. "Get rid of him. Today. Now." I did. 2 hours ago. He's gone. But that's not the only problem. I waited, my heart pounding. I also discovered, through my investigation, that our assistant director, Mr. Frank, knew about Bradley's past. They worked together at that previous daycare. And Mr. Frank deliberately didn't mention it when Bradley applied here. In fact, he was the one who recommended we hire him. The room started spinning. Why would he do that? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to find out. But what I do know is that I can't guarantee your son's safety here until I understand the full scope of what's happening. I don't know if there are other staff members involved. I don't know if this goes deeper. And until I do, I can't in good conscience tell you this is a safe environment for Ethan. Tears were streaming down my face. What are you saying? I'm saying that as of this moment, I'm closing the daycare temporarily. I'm conducting a full investigation with an outside firm. Every staff member will be revetted. Every policy will be reviewed. And I'm personally calling every parent tonight to explain the situation. But Miss Angela whispered to me, I said, trying to understand. She made it seem secretive. Why? Mrs. Kim's expression darkened. Because Mr. Frank was still in the building during pickup. She didn't want him to know that she'd figured it out, that she'd told me. She was protecting you and Ethan until we could get him removed from the premises. I put my head in my hands. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. How long? I asked. How long was this man around my son? 3 days. He started Monday. This is Wednesday. Miss Angela recognized him Tuesday and told me this morning. We've been investigating all day, and I dismissed him this afternoon. 3 days. My son had been in the care of a man who had neglected and harmed children, and I had no idea. I dropped him off with a smile. I picked him up and asked about his day. And the whole time, danger was right there, and I didn't see it. Did he ... I couldn't finish the question. Mrs. Kim's face softened. We don't believe he had any direct unsupervised contact with the children in the 3 days he was here. Miss Angela made sure of that once she recognized him. She kept herself or another trusted teacher in the room at all times. But Mrs. Peterson, the fact that it was even a possibility, the fact that we let this man through our doors, is unacceptable. And I take full responsibility. I was crying now, really crying. What do I tell my husband? What do I tell Ethan? You tell them the truth, in whatever way feels appropriate. And you take whatever time you need to decide if you ever want to bring Ethan back here. I would completely understand if you didn't, but I want you to know that I am going to fix this. I am going to make sure this never happens to any child in my care ever again. There was a soft knock on the door. Miss Angela poked her head in. Ethan is asking for you, she said gently. I wiped my face and stood on shaky legs. Can I ask you something? I said to Miss Angela. Of course. Why did you recognize him from the news coverage 5 years ago? Miss Angela's eyes filled with tears. Because my nephew was one of the children in his class. One of the ones who was hurt. I saw what it did to him, to my sister's family. When I realized it was the same man, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let it happen again. I walked over and hugged her. This woman who had saved my son from something I didn't even know he needed saving from. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for paying attention. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for caring enough to say something." I collected Ethan and drove home in a fog. He fell asleep in his car seat, exhausted from the long day, completely unaware of the storm swirling around him. I kept looking at him in the rearview mirror, his little face peaceful and innocent, and I felt such a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude that he was safe, rage that he'd been in danger, terror at how close we'd come to something terrible, guilt that I hadn't somehow known, hadn't sensed it. When James called from his hotel that night, I told him everything. He wanted to come home immediately, but I convinced him to finish his work trip. Ethan was safe now. The immediate danger was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. Over the next few days, the story came out in pieces. The daycare remained closed while investigators interviewed staff, reviewed security footage, and examined every policy and procedure. Mrs. Kim called me daily with updates. They discovered that Mr. Frank had indeed known about Bradley's past. They had worked together, and Frank believed that Bradley deserved a second chance, that the accusations had been exaggerated. He thought he was helping a friend get back on his feet. He never considered the risk to the children. Mr. Frank was immediately terminated. Criminal charges were being considered for falsifying employment records and deliberately withholding relevant information during the hiring process. 3 other parents pulled their children from the daycare permanently. I didn't blame them. I was considering doing the same thing, but then Mrs. Kim did something unexpected. She invited all the parents to a town hall meeting at the closed daycare. Not to defend herself or make excuses, but to be completely transparent about what had happened and what she was doing to fix it. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to just walk away, find a new daycare, pretend this had never happened. But another part of me needed to hear what she had to say. I needed to understand how this could have happened so I could prevent it from happening again, wherever Ethan ended up. The meeting room was packed. Angry parents, scared parents, confused children who didn't understand why their school was closed. Mrs. Kim stood at the front, no notes, no prepared speech. Just honesty. "I failed you," she began. "I failed your children. I trusted someone I shouldn't have trusted, and I didn't have systems in place to catch what he did. That's on me. And I will carry that responsibility for the rest of my career." She went on to explain everything. The investigation findings, the new policies being implemented. Background checks would now be run quarterly on all staff. References would be verified independently, not just accepted. Any staff member with a connection to a new hire would be required to disclose it. Video surveillance would be expanded. An anonymous reporting system would be created for staff to raise concerns. "I can't promise you nothing bad will ever happen here," she said. "No one can promise that. But I can promise you that I will do everything in my power to make the safest environment possible. And if you choose not to come back, I understand. I respect that. But if you do choose to come back, you will see changes. Real, meaningful changes." After the meeting, I stayed behind. I needed to talk to Miss Angela again. She was cleaning up chairs, and when she saw me, she smiled sadly. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I keep thinking about what could have happened. If you hadn't recognized him. If you hadn't said something." "But I did," she said firmly. "And he's gone. And Ethan is safe." "I need to ask you something," I said. "That day during pickup, why did you whisper? Why didn't you just pull me aside and tell me everything?" Miss Angela set down the chair she was holding. "Because Mr. Frank was watching. He was standing near the front desk, and I could see him looking at me. I think he suspected that I'd figured something out. And I was afraid that if I made it obvious, if I pulled you into a room or made a scene, he might do something to prevent me from telling you, or prevent you from coming back after closing. I know it sounds paranoid, but my instinct was to be cautious, to make it seem casual, to protect the information until I could get it to Mrs. Kim and to you safely." "Your instinct was right," I said. "You protected my son when I couldn't. When I didn't even know he needed protecting. She reached out and squeezed my hand. You couldn't have known. None of the parents could have known. That's why we have to be vigilant. That's why we have to pay attention. That's why we have to speak up when something feels off, even if we can't articulate why. Over the next 2 weeks, I struggled with the decision. Send Ethan back to Sunshine Corner or find a new place. James and I argued about it. He wanted a fresh start. I understood that. But I also saw what Mrs. Kim was doing. She wasn't hiding from what happened. She was facing it, fixing it, making changes. And Miss Angela would still be there. The teacher who had literally saved my son from potential harm because she paid attention, because she remembered, because she cared. I talked to other parents. Some were staying, some were leaving. There was no right answer, just what felt right for each family. What finally decided it for me was a conversation with Ethan. I had been careful not to scare him, to explain that his school was closed for fixing things and making them better. He didn't know about Mr. Bradley. He was 3. He didn't need that burden. But one evening he asked me, "When do I get to see Miss Angela again?" "Do you miss her?" I asked. "Yes, she's my favorite teacher. She always sees me." Those 3 words. She always sees me. That's what Miss Angela had done. She had seen. She had noticed. She had acted. I called Mrs. Kim the next day. "We're coming back," I told her. "But I need you to promise me something." "Anything," she said. "Promise me you'll never stop being transparent. Promise me that if something happens, anything happens, you'll tell us. Not because legally you have to, but because it's the right thing to do." "I promise," she said, and I believed her. Sunshine Corner reopened 3 weeks after it had closed. The changes were immediately visible. New cameras. New policies posted on every wall. A parent advisory board had been created. Quarterly safety meetings were scheduled. But the biggest change was cultural. The staff was different. More alert, more communicative, more serious about their role as protectors. The parents were different too. More involved, more questioning, more present. Ethan's first day back, I stayed for an hour. Miss Angela didn't mind. Several parents did the same thing. We needed to see with our own eyes that our children were safe. And slowly, over days and weeks, trust began to rebuild. It's been 6 months now. Ethan is thriving. He loves his school, his friends, his teachers. And I'm not the same parent I was before. I pay more attention. I ask more questions. I trust my instincts more. I also started volunteering monthly in the classroom. Not because I don't trust the teachers, but because I want to be present. To be part of my son's world. To see what he sees. And I'm grateful every single day for Miss Angela. For her courage to speak up. For her willingness to risk making things awkward or uncomfortable in order to protect children. For her memory of what had happened to her nephew. And her determination to prevent it from happening again. Last week, I thanked her again. She smiled and said something I'll never forget. "This is what we signed up for when we became teachers. Not just to teach ABCs and colors, but to be guardians. To be the ones who notice. To be the ones who speak up. To be the ones who stand between children and harm, even when it's scary, even when it's hard." That whisper in the hallway changed everything. It changed how I parent. It changed how I think about trust and safety. It changed what I expect from the people who care for my child. I used to think that choosing a good daycare was about cleanliness and curriculum and credentials. And those things matter. But what matters more is this. Do the teachers pay attention? Do they remember? Do they speak up? Are they willing to have difficult conversations? Are they willing to risk being wrong in order to keep children safe? Miss Angela was willing. And because of that, my son is okay. Not just physically safe, but emotionally untouched by something that could have scarred him. Because she acted quickly, before anything could happen. I think about the alternate timeline. The one where Miss Angela doesn't recognize Mr. Bradley. Or recognizes him but doesn't say anything because it seems awkward or she's not sure. Or tells someone but it gets dismissed or ignored. In that timeline, something terrible might have happened to my son, to other children. But we don't live in that timeline. We live in the one where someone saw something, said something, and acted. And that made all the difference. If you're a parent choosing childcare, I want you to hear this story. Background checks matter. References matter. But they're not enough. You need teachers who are engaged, who are present, who notice details. You need directors who listen when concerns are raised. You need a culture of transparency and accountability. And if you're a teacher or childcare provider, I want you to know this. Your vigilance matters. Your willingness to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you're not completely sure, even when it might cause problems, that matters more than anything else you do. You might save a child's life. You might prevent trauma that would last a lifetime. You might be the only thing standing between a child and danger. Don't stay silent. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Don't talk yourself out of your instincts. Speak up. Always speak up. That whispered warning in a busy hallway saved my son. 6 words that made me remove him from danger I didn't even know existed. Your son isn't safe here anymore. Miss Angela could have waited until after all the parents left. She could have called me later that evening. But she didn't. She told me immediately, as soon as she could, in the quietest way possible, to protect both the information and my son. And I will be grateful for that for the rest of my life. Ethan is 4 now, getting ready for pre-K. He still talks about Miss Angela. She's still his favorite teacher. And when I watch them together, I see why. She doesn't just teach him. She sees him. Really sees him. And she saw the danger before it could touch him. Every parent should be so lucky. This story isn't about being paranoid or distrustful. It's about being wise. It's about understanding that bad things can happen in good places if we're not vigilant. It's about knowing that the people who care for our children have an enormous responsibility, and most of them take it seriously. But when they don't, we need others to speak up. Miss Angela spoke up. Mrs. Kim listened. Changes were made. And my son is safe. That's what should happen every time. In every school, every daycare, every place where children are cared for by people other than their parents. Vigilance, communication, action. A whisper saved my son. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure other parents know to listen for whispers too, to pay attention, to ask questions, to never assume everything is fine just because it looks fine on the surface. Because sometimes the most important warnings come quietly. And if we're not listening, we might miss them. Listen. Always listen. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Tag a parent who needs to hear about the importance of vigilance. Tag a teacher who has the courage to speak up. Let's make sure every child has someone watching over them who will notice, who will remember, who will act. And please subscribe if you haven't already. These stories need to be told. These lessons need to be shared. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about the safety of children. That whisper changed everything. And I hope it changes something for you too.